Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at 3.6 or 3.8, depending on what teacher you're getting from this from. If it's from me, it's 3.6. But we're going to be looking at multiplicity of functions. Real quick, apologize for the camera. My camera is not working right, so I'm having to use the one on here because I am going to need it today to kind of wave my hands around and show you guys what we're doing. So for the first question, and we're going to be skipping around on the notes a little bit, and part of that reason for that is we've already done some of these notes. We've already done end behavior, so there's no reason for us to do it again. So if you're struggling with the end behavior, go back, look at 3.1's video, and it should clear up the confusion for you. If you're still stuck, of course, feel free to reach out to me. But anyway, so what we're going to be looking at today is what we call multiplicity, or this idea of how many solutions can a problem have. Okay, so that comes from standard form. And when I look at standard form, we're going to look at that first term like we have been in the past. I'm going to look at the exponent of my first term. So the maximum number of zeros I can have here is 3. Okay, and that just comes from the exponent. Now, am I guaranteed to have 3 unique ones? No. Am I guaranteed to have 3 real ones? No. Okay, because this is a cubic, and cubics look something like this. And again, like on this one, I would have 3. On this one, I would only have 1. Okay, and then on this one, I have 2. Okay, but I have what we call a multiplicity, and we'll talk about what that means later. Okay, but the idea here is I can have at most 3 solutions. For this next one, not in standard form, so x to the 4th minus 29x squared plus 100. Again, looking at my first term, looking at my exponent. So my maximum here is 4. Okay, so what does multiplicity mean or imply? Okay, so the idea here is we want to take the time to graph these things and look at them. That being said, we are going to go over to Desmos to do that. So heading over to Desmos, we're going to go into the graphing calculator, or feel free, of course, to use your graphing calculator. And I'm just going to type that in as I have it. So x minus 3, and then x plus 2 quantity squared. Oops, quantity squared. Ooh, there we go. What we're going to notice here is that it kind of touches at -2, and then it crosses at 3. Well, my zeros of this function are 3 and -2. Okay, my x-intercepts are -2, 0, 3, 0. Well, that comes from what we talked about last time in the factoring section when we were setting these things equal to 0. It comes from taking our factors and finding the zeros. And remember, the shortcut there is to just change the sign on those. Well, if I notice, my -2 one came from here, and I have a 2 here. So what we're going to see today is that forces this to have a touch instead of a cross. Okay, so taking that idea and applying it here. What I want to do is I want to set up this table every time. I'm going to take my function, I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to go, okay, well, where are my zeros? Well, I have a 0 at 4, and I have a 0 at 1. Okay, the multiplicity comes from the exponent. So my exponent, my multiplicity for 4 is 2. My multiplicity for 1 is 3. Odds cross, evens touch. So that being said, I have an even multiplicity here, and it's the multiplicities. Okay, so odd multiplicity, even multiplicity, not the 0. Okay, now I know it's kind of funky on this one because I have even, odd, odd. Okay, but I want to make sure that I'm only looking at the multiplicities. So these ones kind of go together. So I have an even multiplicity, so this one's going to be a touch. And then this one's going to be a cross. Okay, so same idea. Now that 3 out there freaks people out. That 3 out there, all it's going to do is stretch this function. Okay, it's not going to change my zeros. It's not going to change my multiplicity. It's not going to change if it crosses or touches. So ignore it. If you have a number out front, ignore it. If you have an exponent out front, we'll talk about that in a second. Variable out front, we'll talk about that in a second. But if you have just a coefficient, a number, don't worry about it. Get rid of it. So my zeros here are 1 and -2. My multiplicity on 1 is 2. My multiplicity on -2 is 1. Now again, these go together. So my multiplicity, my cross, I'm going to have a touch for this first one and a cross for the second one. Okay, same idea. Now I need to be careful here because that last one is not factored. So on these, you do want to make sure that they're factored completely before you do your zeros. This is not factored. Okay, so this is difference of squares. So this is going to factor in x plus 1, x minus 1, and then x plus 3 quantity squared. Okay, so I have zeros at -3, -1, and 1. Multiplicities of 2, 1, 1, touch, cross, cross. Okay, now on this one's a little funky because of that x out front. Remember we said last section that if you have an x out front, that's just like x equals 0. Okay, and the reason that's true is because if I plug in 0 here, it doesn't matter what this is. Doesn't matter what this is. 0 times anything is 0. So anytime you have an x out front by itself, or with like a coefficient, if there was like a 3 here, it would still be 0 because 3 times 0 is still 0. Times something is 0. Times another thing is also 0. So I have 1 at 0, 1 at -5, 1 at 2. Multiplicities of 1, 4, 3, cross, touch, and then cross because it's odd. Okay, now I do want to go back and talk about these for a second. So on this graph, I have a degree of 5. So the total degree comes from the multiplicities added up. So I have a degree of 5. Okay, now remember back in last unit, we talked about in 3.1, and again, this goes back to that end behavior, that a degree of 5 looks something like this because it's odd. Okay, but now I have more information. Now I know where all the middle stuff is. So let's start with the middle stuff. I have a 0 at 4. I have a 0 at 1. I need to start down here and I need to end up here. So going through, at 1, I'm going to cross. So I'm going to go up, I'm going to cross. Okay, now I need to come back down for this 0. That 0 is the one at 4. It's at 2. I'm going to touch. So I'm going to go back up. I'm going to come back down because I need to get all my zeros. But I'm only going to touch here. I'm not going to cross. I'm just going to touch and I'm going to come back up. So if I was sketching the graph, it would look something like this. So now we have a little bit more information about what that middle part looks like. Okay, so it's using that same concept. Now the 3 again is just going to stretch it. We're just looking for sketches, so we don't need to be perfect here. My zeros are at 1 and -2. So here and here. Okay, now again, this is going to be an odd one. So it's going to start down here somewhere and end up here. And I know it's doing that because it's a positive out here. And we'll look at the next one in a second where it's negative and what happens to it. Okay, so at -2, I'm going to cross. At 2, my other 0, I'm going to touch. There we go. Okay, looking at this one. Now I've got 4 or an even. Now remember, evens either went like this or down. Okay, in this case, it's going to be up because it's a positive out front. There's no negative out front. So I know it's going to look like this. So it's going to start up here somewhere and it's going to end up here somewhere. So -1, 2, 3, -1, and 1. So I come down to -3, and -3 tells me I'm going to touch. So I need to go back up. -1, I'm going to cross. And then +1, I'm going to cross. Okay, so here's my sketches. Again, this is your sketches. They don't need to be perfect. Okay, so now I have that negative. So this is even. Remember, evens are either like this or like this. In this case, it's going to be this way because of that negative out front. So I'm going to end down here. I'm going to end down here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0 and 2. At -5, I'm touching. Coming back down. At 0, I'm crossing. And then at 2, I'm crossing. Okay, so something to note here. If you can't do what it's asking you to do with these touches and crosses, you did something is off. Either your touches and crosses are incorrect or your even oddness is incorrect. Don't make extra crosses. Okay, so let's say I messed this up and I said that this was a touch. So then instead here, what would happen? Come on, please erase for me. There we go. So instead here, what would happen is 1, 2. It would look something like this, but we said it needs to end down here. So that tells me I did something wrong. Okay, so don't try to like, okay, don't do that because it doesn't cross here. We don't have a 0 there. Go back, double check that your crosses and touches are right. Okay, so this should be a cross for it to work properly. Okay, so last thing we need to do is kind of recreate this. Okay, using descriptions. So I've got a 0 at -3. I've got a 0 at 4 and at 5. Looking at all this, and I don't really need to recreate my whole chart here. Looking at this, this is going to be even. Now this is telling me which direction it's facing, that negative leading coefficient. So negative or positive would be up, negative would be down. So again, something like this. Okay, at -3, it's a 2. 2 is even, so it's going to be a touch. So touch, come back down. We're going out to this 4. A 4 is going to be an odd, so it's a cross. 1 is also a cross. And we end up where we're supposed to be. Last one. 1, 2, there's 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's positive, okay? Now this one is going to be odd and positive, so somewhere up here, somewhere up here. 1 tells me I've got a cross. 4 tells me I'm going to touch and then come back up. Okay, again, the key here is to not make extra crosses or touches. If you don't have a 0 there, don't try to finagle it and make it work. Okay, double check that you put everything in the right spot. Okay, that's going to be it for the lesson today. Make sure that, again, you are checking in. This is the last lesson for the quarter. So if you are behind, you need to contact me ASAP because at this point, it's almost too late and you're going to probably have to be working into fall break. That makes me have to work into fall break. So please contact me as soon as possible so we can get you back where you need to be. So hopefully you're not having to work during fall break. That test for most of you is going to be the last day of school before the break. Please make sure, again, you're getting that done. If you're missing because of quarantine, please make sure you're contacting me to get that scheduled. Anyway, see you guys next time. Have a good day.